Hi, I'm going to show you how to sew granny squares together using a simple whip stitch. Begin with about a yard of yarn threaded onto a tapestry needle. Normally you would use a color that is the same as at least one of your squares. We're using red so that you can really see what's going on. Our granny squares have 2 chain stitches at each corner. Begin with the bottom stitch and thread your needle under its outer strand. Then through the outer strand of the adjacent square's bottom chain stitch. Pull the thread through, leaving a short tail, and repeat this stitch so that the end of your seam is secure. Now you can pick up your squares and continue to sew up the side, sewing under the outer strand of each adjacent stitch. Since this is a whip stitch, always enter the stitches from the same direction. As you sew, keep a nice, easy tension. If you pull the yarn too tight, then the edges of your squares will become distorted. Continue to sew up the side. When you get to the top corner of the squares, stop sewing together with the bottom chain stitch of each square. You can see here that this is the bottom chain stitch of the 2 chain stitches at the corner. Remove your needle from the thread and get ready for your next square. Now grab the square that goes above your right-hand square and thread your needle with a yard of yarn. Again, normally you would use the same color yarn that you've been using. We use a different color to clarify the process for you. Start again with the bottom chain stitches at the corners. Thread your needle under the outer strands and pull your yarn through, leaving a tail. Because this is the outer edge of the project, we secure the seam by repeating that stitch. Now pick up your squares, the wrong sides are facing each other, and continue to whip stitch up the sides. Finish sewing when you get to the first chain stitch at the corner. Remove your needle from that piece of yarn, and you're ready for your next square. Now rethread the original yarn onto your tapestry needle, and taking the square that completes this quadrant, you'll begin sewing up this vertical side. Start this time with the top chain stitches of the corner, sewing through their outer strands. Close the gap here between the top squares and the bottom squares, and do what you've been doing, work a whip stitch up the side. Stop when you get to the bottom chain stitches of the corner. If this were the outer edge of your project, then you would continue with one more stitch through the top corner stitches and repeat that stitch to secure the end of the seam. But if you plan to add more squares to these 2 squares, then you want to stop here with the bottom chain stitches. Now remove your needle from this yarn and get ready to do the final seam. Now rethread your second piece of yarn onto the needle, and we're going to sew this final horizontal seam here. Now you're going to start with the 2 chain stitches at the corner that haven't been sewn yet. And you're going to pull this stitch a little extra tight to close the gap and sew this seam with a whip stitch. Again, finish when you get to the first of the 2 chain stitches at the corner, unless this is the outer edge of your project, in which case you would want to sew through the next 2 chain stitches as well. Here's what the intersection of 4 squares should look like. The vertical seam runs underneath, and then the horizontal seam goes across the top, forming a little X at each intersection. And that's sewing granny squares together.